Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have a favorite reoccurring guest with us. You will recognize the gentleman on the screen. We have Ganesh Cherinian. How are you?
It's lovely to see you all and to be here.
Yeah, I was just saying before we started recording that just today I got a text message from a Mormonish viewer who said, I love that Ganesh. I love everything he does on your podcast. When are we going to get more? When is he going to be on again? And I was able to write back and say, we are literally taping another episode with him in a couple hours. So you are in high demand, and so are your presentations and your scholarship. How does that make you feel?
Wonderful. I like that it's useful. I like that people are enjoying what is being said and that they're getting a lot from it. That's, gosh, the best compliment ever.
Yep. No, it is. Well, you deserve it. We love everything you bring to the table. It's really fun. And this is going to be a really interesting presentation, isn't it, Landon? We kind of looked through the slides ahead of time and we're like, I think our viewers are going to love this. Amazing.
Yeah, Ganesh always brings great stuff. So
exactly.
Well, this should be very new because I haven't seen anybody cover it at all. And I think it's going to really show the Book of Mormon in a completely different light. So that should help.
Yep. No, this is great because I see more and more podcasts about the Book of Mormon itself. I mean, more than ever, I think. There are, Book of Mormon Central is doing its series on the greatness of the evidence. And then, of course, you have people more on the other side of the aisle saying, no, here's our version of this and that. But it's great. The whole dialogue, the exchange, the back and forth, the delving into the Book of Mormon, we welcome it from all camps, right? It is just very interesting. Don't you think so, Landon?
We tried to do an episode on archaeology, but we couldn't find any. So that's why we do the Book of Mormon text now. That's all they got left.
They got the text. That's exactly right. So, all right. Well, why don't we? I know Ganesh has some amazing slides. Let's just pull those up and let's dive right in because, people are waiting.
Fabulous. Okay, let's have a look at this. So here we go. The Book of Mormon. And particularly this time we're going to look at the Book of Mosiah. And hopefully I'm going to be able to evidence for you that it's based on real events in Joseph Smith's life. So hopefully this will be a really compelling argument that Joseph is the author of the Book of Mormon. I've chosen the background of The Matrix for you, particularly Rebecca, as a 90s tribute movie.
That's right.
But one of the things about that, of course, is that The Matrix seemed to suggest that if you were able to look behind the scenes at the code, you'd be able to tell what was going on. And then once you knew the code, you could master the whole scenario. And that's what we're going to do today with the Book of Mosiah as we understand the Book of Mormon.
I love it. This is great.
And it's going to kind of why are we not getting the next slide? Oh, there we are. Okay, so the last couple of presentations I've done with you have looked at, firstly, Jacob chapter 5 with the allegory of the olive tree and looking at how Joseph was able to compose that from pretty much the New Testament and other things that he was working on. And the last presentation, we looked at the Book of Mormon as oral performance and how a lot of the text was connected to the people that Joseph was performing the Book of Mormon to, like his scribes and other people who were associated with him. And so today we're really going to look at the autobiographical nature of the Book of Mormon. And so I'm going to talk quite a bit about that, but just really using the Book of Mosiah. But I thought just for an overview, I'd give you an idea of kind of what we're going to cover so that anybody who's listening or watching can get an idea of where we're going. So just going to review a little bit of the text development and autobiography that we looked at last time with replacement text. We're going to go through the Book of Mosiah, look at the kings and how that worked, look at the Book of Mosiah as a Christian adventure story, which we touched on a little bit last time, and also the Smith family record of what is going on in their lives, and that hopefully will show the Mosiah text, its autobiography, of Joseph Smith, and then we'll be able to have a look at some of the text development and get to some conclusions. The three books that I'm going to utilize today is Lucy Mack Smith's History, which is on the Joseph Smith Papers Project. So that's freely available. You can go and read it, and it's brilliant. And we'll be taking a lot of excerpts from that. The Book of Mormon, of course, because that's what we're talking about, and Dan Vogel's Early Mormon Documents, particularly Volume 2, which talks about the people around Joseph who understood him before he became anything special, before 1829, when the Book of Mormon was composed. And this is because Joseph didn't write anything down. So we don't have anything prior to, well, very little prior to 1829 about him, because up until that point, he really hadn't done very much. The one kind of contemporary bit of document that we have is his 1826 trial. But really, there just isn't very much. So we have to rely on Lucy's reminiscence, Joseph's own reminiscence later when he's compiling his history, and also the testimonies of people who were interviewed from his neighborhood and both in Manchester and in Harmony, who were able to kind of talk about him and their observations of him. So all of these things are available online, and you can go and compare them, and you should, and they're worthy of some great reads. You can see Dan Vogel's volumes on the archive.org site. So just a quick review. Last time, well, the last two times really, we've been talking about the Mosiah priority and the idea of the Book of Mormon as it was dictated, started at the beginning of Mosiah and ran through to Mormon and Moroni, and then it was then First and Second Nephi continued from there till it caught up with where King Benjamin is in Mosiah. That last dictated portion was put at the beginning, and so that's why the first part of it is a little more cohesive and developed in terms of its theology. And this particular chart shows some of that. And we talked a little bit about this before, but I just wanted to bring it up again because when you're looking at Mosiah, the book, you can see that some of these things are being developed. And one of the first things you notice, particularly with King Benjamin's sermon and also with Abinadi's sermons, is that they don't mention baptism whatsoever. That they basically say that keeping the commandments is all you need to do. But the Book of Mormon quickly evolved to needing baptism, and then also it becoming really prescribed. And that happened during the dictation sequence. So from the time of April 1829 through to June of 1829. So Joseph is evolving quickly in the text of the Book of Mormon, and there are some really big tells for this.
So you're
not going to go into that today.
Since Mosiah was the first thing written after the lost 116 pages, it has the simplest theology, and as it gets later, Mormon and Moroni is the second one, and then they actually go back to First Nephi and Jacob and put that in, and that's the most developed. But it kind of fools you when you're reading the Book of Mormon, because you run into Nephi and Jacob first, where it's most developed, and then it's like you're going the opposite way when you actually read the book in the way it currently is.
And you don't even notice that there's a step down, because when you're reading King Benjamin, it sounds very familiar, except that you can't find those core things in it. You can't find King Benjamin talking about baptism. He doesn't. He just says, basically, you have to believe. And later on with Abinadi and into the beginning of Alma, it's really a born-again experience. So the idea that baptism is essential, it really doesn't start to develop till much, much later. The other thing that I talked about briefly last time was just showing some of the autobiographical nature of the replacement text, particularly Nephi, because there's lots of comparisons between Nephi and Joseph. And there's a whole list here for those who are listening. They might want to go have a look at it, but we're not going to discuss it. But lots of people, when they're reading the beginning part of the Book of Mormon, they can kind of get the idea that Nephi is Joseph Smith, and Lehi is his father, and Sariah is his mother, and the brothers, everybody kind of goes in that same kind of vein. And here's a list of the characters in that first part and who they correspond to. So once you start to understand the code, once you understand who the people are that these characters are represented by, you can start to flesh out an idea of what Joseph is talking about. And he's talking about his own life. He did make a huge move from Vermont through to Western New York, and that is a very similar to move to how he describes Lehi and his family moving from Jerusalem through to the New World. So when we're talking about Mosiah, we're going to talk about a number of people and a few different places. And so I've got a little chart here which suggests that there's Zarahemla, where Mosiah is, and he is going to send people to find the lost people who have gone to Nephi Lehi, and then there's going, for the majority of the Book of Mosiah, there's going to be a understanding of the storyline that mostly happens in this place called Nephi Lehi, which is the land of the Lehites' first inheritance, or Nephi's first inheritance. So we're not going to talk about Mosiah 1 because he doesn't exist in the text. King Benjamin kind of starts off abruptly. We don't hear much about him except for a sermon. We're really going to talk about Mosiah 2 and as a king in Zarahemla, and then he's sending people to Nephi Lehi to find out about a group of people who have left them and gone up there. And we're going to hear about King Zeniff, King Noah, and King Limhi. And along the way, we're going to learn about Abinadi, a prophet, Alma, a priest of King Noah who defects, and another side character called Amulon. So this just gives you kind of an overview. Now, I've included the next two slides because these are just things I've popped off the internet trying to describe this time period in the Book of Mormon, and they look very, very complex. 3 different places, Zarahemla, Lehi Nephi, Helam, and a whole lot of different chapters going in and out of each other. And here's another example, not quite so complicated, but still looks very messy. And I really wanted to use these slides not to so that you have to view them and see them, more that when people are looking at the Book of Mormon, one of the things that they suggest is that Mosiah is quite complex because there's stories within stories, and they jump back in time, and they're in parallel time, and so it feels very like a really difficult, complex narrative, which if you were making up a story would be quite extraordinary. So it has to be real life, and it is. It's Joseph's real life. So I've done a couple of slides to suggest that to make this a lot more simpler and talk about these kinds of events. So there's these are the Mosiah events, and I'm going to show you the next one, and the Smith history, and I'm going to just flip between them a little bit so those who are watching can see that we're talking about the same spaces and same events. So what happens is that we start in the present day, which in the Book of Mormon text is Mosiah, and then he sends an envoy to Lehi Nephi and finds Limhi, who is in distress because the kingdom has fallen to the Lamanites. And he recounts effectively for the next 20 chapters the accounts of Zeniff, who first went up into the land, his son Noah, who lost the war to the Lamanites, and Limhi, who is now in bondage to the Lamanites. And along the way, you also learn about Abinadi and Al. So this should be fairly simple in the sense that we're talking that the beginning part of the story, which is in Mosiah chapter 7 and 8, is a present day account. And then it's going to jump back in time to past event when Zeniff was the king, then move forward to when Noah was a king, and then move forward to when Limhi is a king, and then they're going to unite with Mosiah. And at kind of at the same time, Alma is going to leave and rejoin them at a separate event. Now, if we're looking at this in terms of the Smith history, the idea is that Mosiah is Joseph Jr. He's concerned about his brother Hiram, who is Limhi. Joseph in 1829 is living in Harmony, Pennsylvania at his parents-in-law place. But he's really concerned about his family who are in Manchester, and Hiram is now kind of in charge, and he's in distress. And that's what I'm going to show. And then he's going to recount how Alvin, his older brother, helped establish the family farm in between 1820 through to 1823. But then Alvin dies. Joseph Smith Sr., who is not really a great provider, but now he's back at being the in charge, loses the family farm, and then Hiram becomes a kind of a tributary tenant on the farm. And this is the trajectory of Joseph Smith's life and how he manages to escape. As he's Alma, he manages to escape and relocate to Harmony. And these are all the events of their lives. So hopefully
it's interesting because even if you don't realize you're writing what you know, you do. You know what I mean? You put yourself into it and you sort of, rely on the things that have happened to you. You might even not even realize that you're doing it, but it's just familiar and the story makes sense and the trajectory makes sense. And I think a lot of us do that in our writing. If we do write, I used to write fiction and I'm like, yeah, you just draw on it. It's what's in your mind.
Well, they say everybody's first book is an autobiography, right? No matter what you do.
That's right.
Because you're writing from your heart. You're writing the things that are passionate to you, the things that resound with you, and they're often related to your own life events.
Yep.
So any questions about all of these places? Does this make sense? Does it look all right? The color codes kind of
suggest where you're going with it. So
no, I love the color codes. I love it when people will take events in the Book of Mormon that we already know, but you never see them presented in this way, laid out this way with the certain markers. It helps you kind of explore things in a whole different way, I think. So I love it. This is great.
Fabulous. Well, we're going to go into details. So hopefully this will all become a little bit more clear and you can go back to these slides and see it as it's presented later. Okay, so maybe we just should talk about Joseph and his family. And I don't know who wants to go first. Landon, do you want to just take us through the Smith family events? And I'm just going to put them in the way that it might sound very familiar to Mosiah.
Okay, so this is the storyline, Mosiah 7, chapter 7 to 24, based on the Smith family. Joseph is composing in April 1829 at Harmony, Pennsylvania, relates his family's problems in Manchester, New York. He then recalls a time when his brother Alvin was in charge and things were great, 1823. He tells of how his father's wickedness led to them losing their farm, 1825. He speaks of how he left and his brother Hiram has struggled to keep the family intact, 1827. He hopes his Book of Mormon translation will save the family, 1829. He recalls his own secret conversion to Christianity in 1826, his own trial and desire to get out of the money-digging business, 1826, how he was under bondage with the money diggers for some time after 1827, He also talks about his own tricky beginning to marriage and estrangement, 1827, and also included how he was able to escape his past and start new in harmony in 1828.
All right, so we're going to cover all of those events in Joseph Smith's life and relate them to the characters in the Book of Mosiah. Okay, now I think this is such a really cool little story. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take, as I said at the beginning, we're going to take basically the Book of Mormon events and we're going to contrast them with either the statements from his neighbors and people who knew Joseph and his family, and also Lucy Mack-Smith's history. And we're going to compare the events and see if we can find some things which are very, which suggest that we're talking about the same event. So this is history of Joseph Smith, and he's compiling it into this kind of adventure story. So one of the first things that you find in Mosiah chapter 7 is the idea that Mosiah is concerned, or the people are concerned. There's been a envoy sent to Nephi Lehi, to the land of their inheritance from the people in Zarahemla. And remember, I'm suggesting that the people of Zarahemla are Mulekites, and they want to know. King Mosiah is there, who's a Nephite, and wants to know what's happened to these people. Now, and that's basically what it says in Mosiah chapter 7, verse 1. Now, Rebecca, can you read that second statement from Abigail Harris?
Let's see, right in the middle. Okay, the one that starts with the old lady.
Yeah, the old lady is Lucy Smith.
Is Lucy Smith. All right. The old lady took me into another room, and after closing the door, she said, "Have you $4 or $5 in money that you can lend until our business is brought to a close? The Spirit has said you shall receive fourfold." I then asked Lucy what her particular want of money was, to which she replied, "Joseph wants to take the stage and come home from Pennsylvania to see what we are all about." To which I replied, he might look in his stone and save his time and money. The old lady seemed confused and left the room, and thus ended the visit. This is from Abigail Harris' statement in 1833. That's really facetious of her, isn't it?
It's very facetious of her, and it's very clever. Abigail Harris is Lucy Harris, Martin Harris's sister-in-law. Mm-hmm. And Lucy's saying, "Look, Joseph is concerned about us. He wants to come and visit." And she's saying, "But he's got this magic seer stone. Why can't he just look in your seer stone and see that you're okay, or that whatever you need?" But of course, Joseph Smith's seer stone doesn't work, so he can't do that, right? So why doesn't Mosiah, who has a seer stone, why can't he look in his seer stone and see if the people that have gone to Nephi Lehi, if they're okay? Why does he have to send an envoy up to check on them? It's the same problem. The problem is Mosiah's seer stone doesn't work either, because Joseph's seer stone doesn't work.
Interesting.
And it should work, right? Because Mosiah chapter 8 says, "A seer can know of all things which are past, which are to come, whether they're secret or made hidden." The seer stone is supposed to know everything, but the seer stone that Mosiah has can't tell him what has happened to these people who've gone up to the land of Nephi, just like Joseph Smith's seer stone can't actually tell him what's happening with his family in Manchester. I mean, he can get letters back and forth, but in order to really see, he has to physically be there. So he has to take the stage. Abigail Harris was very clever in her assessment of the situation, but she was more clever than she thought, because, of course, she exposes that Mosiah has the same problem. Okay, so here's a look at the overview of these characters. Ooh, oops, too far. So let's compare present-day Mosiah to Joseph Smith Jr. So the land of Nephi-Lehi is Manchester. The Nephites of the Smith family, Zarahemla is Harmony, Pennsylvania, and the Mulekites, who are different but righteous, are the Hales family, so his in-laws. The Lamanites are the evil others, and King Mosiah is concerned, just like Joseph Smith is concerned. There's going to be an envoy, somebody who's a Mulekite, somebody from the area, probably Alva Hale, it could be Joseph Knight Sr. King Lemhi is Hiram Smith, because this is the present day, and Hiram is now in charge. He finds that the people are in bondage or tribute, and in Manchester, the family farm is lost, and Hiram's under considerable financial stress. He sent a small band for rescue, and that's Joseph Jr. And he also talks about these 24 gold plates of the Jaredites, and this actually mirrors completely the idea of the plates that Joseph has. And of course, King Mosiah is a seer and a translator, and Joseph Smith is that same seer and translator. So let's look at the statements that suggest that this could be the case. All right. Landon, do you want to read the first two?
Yeah, starting out Zenith, which is Alvin. Mosiah 9:6, and I went in unto the king, and he covenanted with me that I might possess the land of Lehi Nephi and the land of Shalom. We all now sat down and counseled together relative to the course which was best for us to adopt in our destitute circumstances. And we came to the conclusion to unite our energies and endeavor to obtain a piece of land. Lucy Smith, History, 1845. You want me to keep going?
Yes, why not? Yeah, let's do the next two as well. Yep.
Then Mosiah 10:4, and I did cause them that the men should till the ground and raise all manner of grain and all manner of fruit of every kind. And then Joseph's like the same thing happening in his life. My husband and two oldest sons set themselves about raising the means of paying for 100 acres of land for which Mr. Smith contracted and which was then in the hands of a land agent. In 1 year's time, we made nearly all of the first payment. The agent advised us to build a log house on the land and commence clearing it. We did so. It was not long till we had 30 acres ready for cultivation. Lucy Smith History, 1845.
And the Smiths did. They tilled the ground. They had a few animals. They raised corn. This was exactly what happened. What happens in Zenith, in Mosiah chapter 9 and 10, happens at the Smith home.
And it's interesting too that she even uses the word till the ground and raise all manner of grain and manner of fruit. And, in the Americas at the time of Mosiah, there were no draft animals, so you couldn't really till the ground. And you didn't raise grain. What in the Americas, you raised corn, squash, and beans. And generally you planted those together, not tilling them in the ground. So the Mosiah description is very similar to what Joseph and his family was doing, not what the native people of the area would have been doing.
Exactly. And maybe Rebecca, can you do the next two?
Yeah. We've got Mosiah 10:5, which says, and I did cause that the women should spin and toil and work all manner of fine linen, yea, and cloth of every kind, that we might clothe our nakedness. And thus we did prosper in the land. And then again, from the Lucy Smith History, I commenced with 200 yards of cloth for a stock of clothing for my family. And I had done considerable at painting oilcloth coverings for tables, stands, etc. I set up the business and did extremely well. I furnished all the provisions for the family, besides doing considerable towards replenishing our household and kitchen furniture. That is very interesting.
Yeah, so all the toiling and laboring in particularly spinning and cloth work that happens in the Book of Mormon is really related to Lucy Mack. That's kind of what her thing was. She did a lot of work with cloth. She made a business out of it. It supported the family while the boys were doing the heavy manual labor work of farming.
Yeah, and I will say that in Mosiah, in the Book of Mormon, that was not happening. There was no spinning. There was no fine cloth. There was none of that.
Yeah, certainly no linen.
No.
No. Flax was something that the Smiths cultivated on their farm.
Yeah.
So okay.
Let's see. I can do the next one. I think you wanted me to read
please.
too. Mosiah 9:12. Now they were a lazy and idolatrous people. My dad used to read me this scripture all the time when I wouldn't help in the garden every Saturday, all the time. And I said, "Yep, that's me. Sorry, I'd rather watch cartoons." Although I will say, we did have a giant garden when I was growing up. And my dad, one time he goes, "I want you to go and plant the seeds." I walked out in my high heels. I was about 15. I made holes in the ground by walking. And then I planted the seeds. So how lazy is that? It was a workaround. I thought it was brilliant. It was great. Anyway, that's the kind of farm girl I was. Anyway, all right. Now, sorry, that phrase just brought back all those memories of my dad going, "Remember what they said in the Book of Mormon? Don't be lazy and idolatrous." Okay, now they were a lazy and an idolatrous people. Therefore, they were desirous to bring us into bondage, that they might glut themselves with the labors of our hands, yea, that they might feast themselves upon the flocks of our field. And the next one from Mosiah is 10:18. For this very cause had King Laman, by his cunning and lying craftiness and his fair promises deceived me, that I have brought this my people upon this land, that they may destroy them. Yea, and we have suffered these many years in the land. And now I, Zeniff, after having told all these things unto my people concerning the Lamanites, I did stimulate them to go to battle with their might, putting their trust in the Lord. Therefore, we did contend with them face to face. Ooh, that's a good one. And then do you want me to read the one from the Lucy Mack?
Yeah, so so this kind of suggests that, there's this, Mosiah 9 and 10 are war chapters, the idea that these people are fighting, but this obviously didn't happen at the Smith home, but what the comparison is really fascinating to me. Yeah, so if you could read the next.
Yes. One. So from the Lucy Smith history, she says, "But the second payment was now coming due, and no means of yet meeting it. Alvin accordingly proposed to his father that they should take the business at home in his entire charge, whilst said he would go abroad to see if I cannot make the second payment and the remainder of the first. But by my son's persevering industry, he was able to return to us after much labor, suffering, and fatigue, with the necessary amount of money for all except the last payment." Interesting.
And just finish off with that last quote from Zeniff.
All right, and then we finished with Mosiah 10:10, "And Zeniff, even I, in my old age, did go up to battle against the Lamanites, and we slew them with a great slaughter."
Right, so if you can imagine that Joseph is using his life as a Christian adventure story, and that he's this little king called Mosiah, and that there were kings like his brother Alvin in his own hometown, and Alvin has to go out and fight the craftiness of others, or the interest payment, right? Mm-hmm. That he needed to make good on the first payment. There were 3 payments to be made for them to be able to secure their farm. First payment was almost made, but not quite, and they needed the second payment. So these 2 things Alvin went and did, just like Zeniff fought against the Lamanites in chapter 9, and then he did an even greater battle in Mosiah chapter 10, where he kind of completely obliterated them. So this was Alvin. He's making payments on the land, and he's winning. He won the battle, and he managed to secure the farm in good stead by his industry and his suffering. Just like Zeniff got out there and fought on behalf of his people and defeated the Lamanites. the
Yeah, and those
creditors.
are the modern day battles, right? That's who you're battling, being able to make your mortgage and
Mortgage payments.
the angst in your family, and somebody has to go out and slay the wildebeest, right? And bring home the bacon. Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's just so, exact. It's just almost funny that he's using this. But yeah, you're absolutely right. If you're thinking of your life as an adventure and it really just is boring car payments and mortgage payments and things like that, how are you going to spice it up? Well, gosh, I'm really living the dream. I'm fighting the dragons. I'm
That's right.
slaying the enemies. That's how you zhuzh up your life. Okay, so let's have a look at the past one, Zenith, with Alvin reigning. So, land of Nephi-Lehi, which we've already established is Manchester, and Palmyra. The Nephites of the Smith family. King Zenith is Alvin. We learn that King Zenith is overzealous in Mosiah chapter 7. And Lucy Smith uses the same word to describe Alvin, the idea of him having zeal and piety. So it's really interesting that these same key words are coming up. King Laman and his sons are the land agent and the new land agent. The covenant treaty that Zenith makes is the contract on the land purchase. Lamanite skirmishers are creditors, who are bugging the Smiths. The crops and the clothing, as we suggested, were Lucy's textiles and clearing the land. The wars brewing, the land payments being due, and the small battle in Mosiah 9 and the large battle in Mosiah 10 are an example of the first small payment that needs to be made and the second big payment that needs to be made. And the triumph is the family prospering under Alvin, who saves them.
Yeah, it reminds me of probably no one else has heard of this, but one of my favorite movies growing up was The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And it was about somebody, it was a story, of course, and then a movie, somebody that just fictionalized and fantasized and made his whole life into adventure. The regular things that were happening, he would just spin off into these incredible fantasies, based on what was happening, that he would, in his own mind, he was living this whole other adventure story. And that's exactly what this reminds me of.
And there are tons of little parallels like that, too many for us to go into today. But it's so fascinating how close this is mirroring Joseph's life. And we only have a reminiscence, right? We only have Lucy Back's understanding in 1845. So we don't have as many details as we might otherwise have if Joseph had kept a journal. But even with the time gap, you see all of these lovely, incredible parallels between, and they're so specific between the what's happening in Mosiah and what's happening in Lucy Mack's history and others around the area. So we're going to take a little sideline trip here because, of course, last time we talked about how the Book of Mormon is a Christian adventure story and very much like Pilgrim's Progress. And so I wanted to show that if you looked at these chapters about Zenith, which is Mosiah 9 and 10, you could really understand it as a Christian adventure story, and the ways that Joseph imagined his life is something quite special. But let's, in order to do this, I wanted to look at the code. So we said at the beginning that we were going to look at the matrix and look at the code underneath what's happening. So let's have a look at it. And this is Mosiah chapter 9 and Mosiah chapter 10 put side by side. And when you do that, you realize that it's the same story repeated twice. And you can line up various parts of these two stories. They're not exactly the same, of course, otherwise you'd be able to tell. But you can, if you start to line them up, you can see that they actually they mirror each other because Joseph is telling the same story arc twice. He's using the same narrative twice, and he's just putting in slightly different variations of information so that it tells a complete story. And if you really want to get excited about this, you can also go and have a look at Alma chapter 2. I haven't done it in this presentation, but you can see in Alma chapter 2 that Joseph uses the same story narrative again. It's just not as beautiful as the one that is Mosiah 9 and Mosiah 10. But we're just going to go through this fast because you can do this at home. Just go take the chapter from 9 and the chapter from 10, put them in a table right next to each other, and play around with the spacing till you get the words lining up.
Well, you write what you know, don't you? You write what you know. He's doing it over and over again.
And he's got himself a story that he knows well enough that he can tell it again and again with slightly different variation so that it feels like a new story, even though it's the same story narrative. But he gives himself away because the language is exactly the same in key places. So there are at least 25 comparisons with the language between these two, where the same language or very, very close language is being used to mark the story points along this way. And so I'm just going to go through them quickly because it will take forever, and you can pause the video if you want to read. But you can see particularly there are some places where they line up just so beautifully, especially where they're talking about groups of things happening. So in Mosiah chapter 9, it talks about seeds, and in Mosiah chapter 10, it talks about clothing, and yet you can line up those two things really beautifully. And all of the places that I've highlighted here have direct language to show you that they're exactly the same.
Well, Landon, you've read the Book of Mormon way many more times than I have, being a missionary. Did you ever notice this about 9 and 10?
I did not. I didn't notice in Genesis that you have multiple creation stories, although I think I did kind of realize there was a problem with the flood when you start talking about, animals coming 7 and 1 versus 2 and 2. But right. I have done this with the Gospels. Mm-hmm. And if you line up Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you find exactly the same thing, that they're quoting from the same source because the words are exactly the same. There's whole sentences almost that are word for word, and you don't get that from authors that are just coming from different authors. They're clearly coming from some source that is similar, and so this is interesting.
Yeah, and look, some of it is just word for word. Well, lots of it is word for word, but look at verse 16 from Mosiah 9 and verse 8 from Mosiah 10, and you can see, I did arm them with bows and with arrows and swords and with cimenters and with clubs and with slings. And in 10, it's bows and with arrows and with swords and cimenters and with stones and with slings. So they're just the same. He's got a story in his head, and as he's reciting it, he's using the same points along the way. And this goes on and on till the very end. One thing that is different about these two chapters, Mosiah 9 has an explanation about the Lamanites, and Mosiah 10 also has an explanation about the Lamanites, but they are different. The two narratives about the Lamanites are different understandings. And so one of the ways why you don't see that Mosiah 9 and Mosiah 10 are the same story is because right in the middle, there is this Lamanite explanations, but they're different for the two chapters. But if you extract the Lamanite explanation, the fact that they're both there is really interesting. But if you extract the Lamanite explanation, you can line up all of those points and see that 9 and 10 are exactly the same story, just repeated. So it's just so fascinating. Once you start to see that, you can see it all over the Book of Mormon, because there are a number of times, like I said, in Alma chapter 2, where this same story narrative is being used again. But there are also lots of these throughout the Book of Mormon. The missionary Ammon and the missionary Aaron in Alma chapter 18 and verse and 21, they're the same narrative. The narrative of Noah and the narrative of King Replicash, they are the same narrative, and you can line them up against each other. You've got Korihor in Alma chapter 30 and Sherem in Jacob chapter 7, and you can line those two up as well. So this is Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith has an idea. He has a story. He has a story in the back of his head. They're narrative stories. They're not necessarily written down, but the point was, as he produces them by orating them, you get a different flavor. But you can tell the same story because you can line them up word for word along the sequence.
And he has the same pat phrases, basically, like a lot of us do when we speak. Who would his scribe have been for Mosiah 9 and 10? You guys know this better than I do.
So we don't have the original manuscript, so we can't tell, but it's likely to be Oliver Cowdery.
Yeah, I feel like on the second day, Oliver would have gone, I already told that story like yesterday. You're telling the same story, Joseph. Get it together. I mean, don't you think?
Well, I don't know.
It was different enough, different enough. But you would wonder if the scribes would notice. God, I feel like deja vu. I feel like I've written this before.
Yeah, I don't.
This is like if Rebecca wrote scripture, we'd get the same stories over and over.
What are you implying? It's true. I have a catalog of 450 great stories, and I do use them over and over. But I've never heard a complaint except for by you.
Yeah, I'm not complaining, but it does bring to bear that people will tell the same story over and over because it's what there is in them. Yep. So that kind of goes to Ganesh's argument here that you're seeing the same story because this is the story Joseph knows.
Yep.
And it's based on
to illustrate things. I mean, when I tell stories on podcasting, and I'll often say, I know I've told this before, but this, because it illustrates something so well. And that's why you use it. It's your own little allegory, your own little parables, your own scripture that you have. What's the song you love from My Turn on Earth, Landon? You're the one that writes your own story.
Writes my own story.
Now Landon's going to sing do, 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 do. Yeah, but it's true. We all write our own story. We're very familiar, and we can pull it out at any time to use to illustrate any kind of point. And this is what Joseph is doing.
And he does it so well. Like he's really good at this. And he's so good at it that nobody has recognized that Mosiah 9 and Mosiah 10 are the same story, right? Nobody recognizes that Zenith is Alvin. Like I haven't seen this anywhere else. Nobody has ever made these connections, and so but they're embedded in the text. And once you start to see them, just like a code, it starts to unravel pretty quickly because you can see all of these just incredible coincidences. Well, they're not coincidences. They are dependent. These stories are dependent on Joseph's life. Okay, so let's have a look at the next king, which is King Noah, of course, and this is Joseph Smith Sr. And what we know about Noah is that he's a bit of a wine bibber. He likes to drink. Gets a bit, and he just doesn't keep the commandments of God according to Mosiah chapter 11. And of course, Lucy says the same thing about her husband. He's not a church guy. He's declined to go to the meetings. And in Mosiah 11, Noah's causing his people to commit sin. They are, they're going through all kinds of manner of wickedness. And in Joseph Smith's neighbors' statements, they all tell a very similar story. And if you go through Dan Vogel's work, you can just read them all. But here's one from Joseph Capron from a reminiscence from 1833. he says he and indeed the whole family of the Smiths were notorious for indolence, foolery, and falsehood. Their great object appeared to be to live without work while they were digging for money. They were harassed daily by the demands of creditors, which they were never able to pay. So again, that whole idea that the Lamanites, the Lamanite others are these creditors that are hounding the Smith family.
This is interesting because this Joseph Capron is 1833, so this is very contemporary to Book of, right when the Book of Mormon was coming out. And when I was growing up in the church, if anyone were to read this, we'd say, "Oh, that's anti-Mormon, statements. That's people just trying to put down the church." But when you look at it, this agrees with everything historically that we now know. We know that Joseph Smith's father was a wine bibber and that he was into folk magic and went on treasure digs and had his sons go out in the middle of the night and dig things, and that they weren't paying for their farm and they weren't able to make the payments. And so this, what he describes, goes very along with what we historically know at this point. Whereas if you read the church narrative, oh, we cleared the land and we worked hard and we raised and we built a beautiful farm and all of that, which we know is not what happened at this point.
Well, I feel like that was the narrative when we were growing up, but I feel like with the Saints book, just because so much is known now, they did try to, in very soft language, allude to things like this. That there was some treasure digging, perhaps there were some concerns about money, So you're right, as time goes on, the church's statements align even more with
they start sounding more like Joseph Capron than
isn't that interesting?
Smith's, yeah.
And it gets even more exciting with that, of course, because if you think about King Noah as being Joseph Smith Sr. and Alma being one of the priests of Noah, the whole idea that the priests of Noah are the treasure gang, and Joseph Smith Sr. is kind of one of the main guys, and Joseph Smith Jr. is one of the other treasure diggers that is working with him. So that's the comparison, that Joseph Smith Sr. is putting more time and investment into treasure digging, which obviously doesn't pay off, or pays off poorly, and it's not, it's a terrible waste of time. And it just is about robbing people, the wickedness and all that kind of stuff. And it just goes so in line with, what's happening with Noah in the Book of Mosiah. And the other thing that goes really well is Mosiah chapter 11. One of the things that King Noah is known for is building many elegant and spacious buildings. And Lucy Mack says in her history, they've made the payment on this on the farm, and so they're feeling a bit comfortable. And Alvin dies, so he's not around, but he's secured all the material for the house to be built. And so what they do is they go ahead and build the house. And so that's after Alvin's died. And this is what she said in her history. She goes, having the building of the house already paid for, we thought it would be well to set the workmen at the building work and have it completed. We accordingly did so. Ere long, we had a pleasant, commodious habitation ready to receive us. So it's interesting that King Noah's building projects align with what's happening in the Smith home at that particular time.
And so are you saying that at the same time that Joseph timeframe that he's writing about the building, it's actually going on in his own life? Everything is just parallel like that.
Well, yeah.
Well, there's a slight history because it's before the farm.
Yeah, a little behind it. Yeah.
Right. But it's what he experienced. So that's very.
This is he was there.
Like a journal. So,
yeah.
An embellished journal.
Are you sure King Noah isn't Russell M. Nelson? Because he also builds many elegant and spacious buildings.
He does.
Again, every time we build elegant and spacious buildings, it's a wicked thing.
Right. It's
unless it's the church building temples. But and just one clarification for those who may not be LDS, King Noah is not the same Noah that you're, Noah in the Ark. No. There's a character named King Noah
in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
All right, so here's the lineup. just like we did with the others. So again, Landon Nephi, Lehi is in Manchester, and the Nephites of the Smith family. King Noah's Joseph Smith Sr. We know that King Noah's a wine bibber, so is Joseph Smith Sr. Priest of Noah, the treasure digging gang. Alma, in this scenario, is Joseph Smith Jr., and we're going to see that in a minute. The Lamanites skirmishes are, the creditors picking off the Smiths. The riotous living talked about in King Noah's time is the foolery that the neighbors are talking about. The taxing that Noah is doing is the digging for money that Joseph Smith Sr. is doing. A big battle happens, and this is the Harmony, Pennsylvania dig. So remember in the story of King Noah, he kind of runs away and abandons his people. Well, that's what happens in Joseph Smith's life. Joseph Smith Sr. and Joseph Smith Jr. have gone to Harmony, Pennsylvania to make the payment on the land, and they're not around when the creditors descend. Abinadi, I think, is Isaac Hale, because he really disapproves of this whole endeavor, and that's the family that the Smiths stay with. And the Court of Noah really kind of mirrors Joseph's own 1828 glass-looking trial. And the daughters of the Lamanites is Emma Smith. We're going to find that out pretty soon too. So let's learn a little bit about Isaac Hale and how he feels about his son-in-law and the Smiths in general. Landon, do you want to give, first, as a first thing, Isaac Hales was there in Harmony, Pennsylvania. The Smiths and the treasure digging gang of Josiah Stolz boarded at his house, and he actually witnessed the treasure dig agreement, and this is in the Joseph Smith Papers Project if you want to go and have a look. So he absolutely was a witness to what was going on, but he just did not approve, and there's some statements from him that suggest that. Landon, can you run us through those?
Yeah, Isaac Hale was a devout Methodist. He witnessed the treasure dig agreement. I first became acquainted with Joseph Smith Jr. in November 1825. He was at that time in the employ of a set of men who were called money diggers, and his occupation was that of seeing or pretending to see by means of a stone placed in his hat, and his hat closed over his face. In this way, he pretended to discover minerals and hidden treasure. His appearance at this time was that of a careless young man, not very well educated, and very saucy and insolent to his father. Smith and his father, with several other money diggers, boarded at my house while they were employed in digging. One of the company gave me his note for $12 for his board, which is still unpaid. $12, maybe 68 cents. Maybe that's what that thing is. Smith stated to me that he had given up what he called glass looking and that he expected to work hard for a living and was willing to do so. Isaac Hill's statement, 1834. Their intentions of mobbing us were only counteracted by the influence of my wife's father's family under divine providence, who had become very friendly to me and who were opposed to mobs. That's Joseph Smith History 175.
So I think Isaac Hale is an epitome of Abinadi because he's a great, righteous, upright Methodist. And I think when Joseph was living at the Hale farm during this money digging, he realized that Isaac Hale was a great father and his own father was terrible. And that's why there were these kind of saucy and insolent remarks between Joseph Smith Jr. and his father. So he saw Isaac Hale as this great guy who spoke out against the money digging and the thievery that it was. And just like Abinadi kind of confronted King Noah and told him that he was wicked and not obeying the commandments. And so later on, when Smith connected with Isaac Hales, he promised to give up this business because Isaac Hale just did not approve of it. And one of the interesting things about this is that Joseph Smith never once talked against his father-in-law, Isaac Hale. Even in his history, he talked about him favorably, which which means that even though Isaac Hale didn't like Joseph, Joseph really respected and revered his father-in-law. And it just lines up so beautifully with the interactions between Abinadi and King Noah, and also how Alma's watching this and really siding with Abinadi rather than his boss, King Noah. So let's talk about conversion, because one of the things that the Book of Mormon suggests in Mosiah with Alma is that in the court of Noah, while Abinadi is confronting King Noah, Alma has a change of heart. And he has such a change of heart that he kind of keeps it to himself because, yeah, and he uses kind of quite odd language with regard to this. Rebecca, can you read these statements?
Sure. We'll start with Mosiah 19, 1 and 3. And now it came to pass that Alma, who had fled from the servants of King Noah, repented and his sins and iniquities, and went about privately among the people, that it might not come to the knowledge of the king, and began to teach the words of Abinadi. And then from the Joseph Smith history, in process of time, my mind became somewhat partial to the Methodist sect, and I felt some desire to be united with them. That is really funny. In secret. That's great. What a great comparison. Also, the next thing is from Joseph and Hyle Lewis's statement in 1879. He presented himself to the Methodists in a very serious and humble manner, and the minister, not suspecting evil, put his name on the class book in the absence of some of the official members, among whom was the undersigned, Joseph Lewis, who, when he learned what was done, took with him Joshua McCune and had a talk with Smith. They told him plainly that such a character as he was a disgrace to the church, and he could not be a member of the church unless he broke off his sins by repentance, made public confession, renounced his fraudulent and hypocritical practices. He immediately withdrew his name. Kind of said, can't do it. Sorry, can't do it. And again, from the Joseph Caprone statement, at one time addicted to vice and the grossest immoralities, at another time making the highest pretensions to piety and holy intercourse with Almighty God. And that's again from 1833. That's contemporary.
And that Joseph Hyle and Hyle Lewis statement, so that was Emma's cousins, and they were talking about an event in 1828. So, you know, this suggests that Joseph, as Alma, he got converted somewhere in Harmony, and he wanted to be united with the Methodists. He wanted to be like his father-in-law, Isaac Hale, because he was just such a better father than his own father. And but he had to do it privately, or he tried to do it privately because he didn't want his father to know, or he didn't want Noah to know, because he was committed to this course of being a money digger, and the idea of him giving this up was not something that his father would have approved of. So the comparisons are just too uncanny to not take seriously. And I think one of the things that this does is it suggests that Joseph really did have a conversion experience that he kept quite private. And it probably was later than the first vision that we all talk about as in the church. But the idea that he did actually convert, and that in the Book of Mormon was really somewhat of a penance for him from being a money digger. He was trying to use it for good, trying to convert people to Christianity, to maybe a form of Methodism that he really respected from his father-in-law, Isaac Hale. Okay, let's have a look at the Lamanite daughter's abduction now. So this is another great story in Mosiah. And it dovetails into this, and really dovetails into the life of Joseph Smith. So, the language here is also really interesting. Mosiah chapter 20 suggests that the priests of the kings of Noah, so the money diggers, have been run off, and they're ashamed to return to the city, fearing that the people will slay them. And tarrying in the wilderness, they discover the daughters of the Lamanites, and they watch them. And when there's only a few of them, they took them and carried them off to be their wives. We all know that story. It's a classic.
Women. Yep.
It's the Sabine women. It is. That's right.
That's right. So
also 7 brides for 7 brothers, right?
Talking about those Sabine
yep,
women.
Right.
It's a crazy story. Yeah, no, where's the consent in that? We should really point that out, that this is not 2024, is it? Lucy talks about how her son Joseph wants to get married. She says that he came to her and said, "I've concluded to get married, and if you have no objections, Miss Emma Hale would be my choice before any other woman I had ever seen." So while he was, boarding with the Hales, he struck up a friendship with Emma Hale, and he really wanted to get married to her. So he went back to Harmony, and he made his intentions known to his father-in-law, Isaac Hale. Guess how he responded? After these occurrences, young Smith made several visits at my house and at length asked my consent to his marrying my daughter Emma. This I refused and gave him my reasons for doing, some of which were that he was a stranger and he followed a business that I could not approve. So the stranger in this case is probably, it's not religious, not a Methodist. And of course, there's a money digger, so Isaac Hale doesn't approve. He then left the place. Not long after this, he returned, and while I was absent from home, carried off my daughter into the state of New York, where they were married without my approbation or consent.
I'd always compared that stealing of the women to the Sabine women, but I never thought that, Joseph basically did the same thing to Emma. So interesting.
Yeah, they don't really focus on that. I mean, in all the church meetings where they've talked about their life, they don't really talk about the disrespect of, doing that under the father's watch, right? And as people point out, Emma would have been a higher class of a person, right? She was a catch.
Yeah.
She had a bright future and was very marriageable to all kinds of suitors that would be really, really appropriate pillars of the community, that, good families, that kind of thing. And I'm sure that's what Isaac was saying, is like, are you freaking kidding me? My daughter is of this caliber. You are not. And yet there he does. He sneaks right in, right under his nose. They don't focus on that. They talk about it as a love story, like anything for love, right? But only in this case is this acceptable and ordained.
Yeah. I've got a quote a little bit later where basically Emma's the favorite, and this devastates the family and the wider family.
I can see
Peter
that.
Ingersoll. Oh yeah, it's huge.
The potential of a good marriage, right? The potential of an alliance with another pillar of the community family, which is what should have happened with who she should have married. It should not be this.
And this is where the idea of leaving parents out of the wedding ceremony comes from, right here from Joseph.
Yeah.
But they glamorize it, I think. I mean, they just talk about it as a great love story. Instead, It was an elopement. It was not obeying your father and your mother. It was very sneaky. It was very inappropriate. And especially back then, not done, right? The daughter especially was in the father's household and obeyed the father's wish. It was very extreme, I think. And they don't really focus on that when they talk about this part of the history.
It's interesting, the language too in Mosiah chapter 20, because he uses the word ashamed, which suggests that Joseph has some shame about this, that he didn't do right by his father. In fact, Peter Ingersoll, in his statement in 1833, says his father-in-law, because they went to the house, him and Joseph and Emma went to go collect Emma's things. And his father-in-law, Mr. Hale, addressed Joseph in a flood of tears. "You've stolen my daughter and married her. I had much rather have followed her to the grave."
That's a very Mormon thing to say.
Yeah. Yes. But, oh gosh, the depth of feeling, right? The idea, a flood of tears. This is Isaac Hale. Joseph brought Isaac Hale to tears over this. So gosh, yeah, I'd be ashamed too. So that, Mosiah chapter 20 makes a lot more sense when you understand that this is talking about, Joseph and Emma. Okay, let's get on to the next bit. So losing the farm to creditors. How does this happen? And how is it played out in Mosiah? Gosh, who are we up to? Landon, are you able to do that one?
Sure. This starts in Mosiah 19:2. And now behold, the forces of the king were small, having been reduced, and there began to be a division among the remainder of the people. Then Lucy Smith says, we received intelligence of the arrival of a new agent for the land. This caused us to bethink ourselves of the remaining payment which was still due, and which we would be under the necessity of making prior to obtaining the deed. Joseph Smith Sr. and Jr. were away when creditors came, they said. We have bought the place and paid for it, and we forbid you touching anything on the farm, and moreover, we warn you to leave forthwith and give possession to the lawful owners, as we have got the deed in our possession. That's in 1845. And then Mosiah 19:14. And it came to pass that the Lamanites had compassion on them, and took them captives, and carried them back to the land of Nephi, and granted unto them that they might possess the land under the conditions that they would deliver up their property, even one half of all they possessed, one half of their gold and their silver and all their precious things, and thus they should pay tribute to the king of the Lamanites from year to year. Then Lucy says, Hiram negotiated a new deal on behalf of Lucy. Money was paid over to them, and they gave up the deed to Mr. Lemuel Durfee, who now came into possession of the farm. We were now renters upon premises, which 1 week before we considered ourselves as much the entire possessors. But Mr. Durfee gave us the privilege of the place 1 year, with this provision that Samuel Smith, our fourth son, was to labor for him 6 months.
Right. So, gosh, the Mosiah chapter 19 mirrors what happened to the Smiths. While Joseph Senior and Joseph Jr. were in harmony on treasure dig, the creditors descended on the property. Lucy was in kind of just beside herself. She organised for Lemuel Durfee, who was a local Quaker, to save the family by buying the land and keeping them on as renters. And part of that agreement was that they had to give up Samuel Smith for 6 months. So half the year.
Indentured servant. They sold him into indentured servitude. I didn't know that.
But it's interesting that the language in Mosiah chapter 19 is that they had to give tribute, half of what they possessed. And actually this happened. Like, Samuel Smith had to give up half his year for Lemuel Durfee. And
how old would he have been at this point, little Sam?
He's in 1825, he's about 14, 15, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say like a teenager.
Yeah.
Good grief. I did not know that they had to indenture Samuel. That is really interesting. They don't talk about that very much in Sunday school either, do they?
Well, they copied that now and send you to clean the toilets at the church.
Same thing.
To give us your kids and have them clean the bathrooms.
That's right. Well, and now I understand the stories from the Kirtland dedication. I mean, so traumatized that he had to drink so much that, wasn't it Samuel that?
I think it was Sam that was puking out
the windows. Into the buckets, and then his brother Don Carlos had to empty them out the window. Yeah, he was obviously traumatized from being practically an indentured servant. Good heavens.
Yeah. So it's just so fascinating, the connections between what's happening in Mosiah chapter 19 and what's happening at the Smith farm, and it's the other thing you see there is that there's a really similar interaction between Gideon and Noah and Limhi as there is between Lucy Mack and her husband Joseph Smith Sr. and Hiram Smith, their son. So yeah, just fascinating, and just lines up so beautifully and so perfectly that it's hard not to see the comparisons once you start to put them side by side. Okay, so then let's have a look at that. So let's put them side by side. We've got again, the land is the same. King Limhi is this time Hiram Smith. He's now a tributary king because, of course, this is 19th century America. Women can't hold property. They can't. Even though Lucy Mack Smith is incredibly capable, she's run her own business, right? She's a advisor. She can't be the king. It's only a male, and it can't be Joseph Smith Senior because he's just unreliable, and so it's Hiram Smith, and he is the person who negotiates the new contract with Lemuel Durfee. Lemuel also makes an appearance in the first book of Nephi, of course, as one of the brothers, but one of the evil brothers. They're now under this new agreement, and Joseph Smith is senior and junior are gone, or they're in harmony, and then Joseph Smith goes down there to be near Emma, so he lives in Bainbridge. So yeah, it's lines up pretty well. The one cool thing is that Gideon is this advisor in the Book of Mosiah, and Lucy Smith in her history talks about how she's advising Hiram and how to make all of these transactions happen. And so it's really Gideon is Lucy Smith. She appears in the text. She's she might be Sariah in First Nephi, but she's Gideon in Mosiah, and and she's angry with her husband. Of course, she wants to kill him because he's lost the family farm because of his treasure digging. But she loves Hiram and she wants him to succeed, and so she's advising him. So yeah, the lineup is just so beautiful.
I just always like to be reminded that there is a Lemuel in Joseph's life. Just a neighbor, right? There he is, a bad guy. I love it.
Oh, there's a Lemuel Durfee,
yeah.
of course. And there's a Laman too, right?
Yeah.
Who's also a bit of a scoundrel. So
you write what you know.
Yeah, right, what you know. So okay, again, let's go back to the code a little bit because I just want to show you a little bit more code, things that line up. Now, before we looked at Mosiah chapter 9 and chapter 10 side by side, this time we're just going to look at Mosiah chapter 22 and cut it in half and put it side by side. Does that make sense? So, because this is a short chapter, and here are all of the lineups between various verses. So verse 2 lines up with verse 8, verse 3 lines up with verse 9, verse 6 lines up with verse 10 and down further, and verse 7 lines up with verse 10 as well. So you can see that they all, the same thing again. Joseph is using a story, this time in the same chapter. Well, to be fair, Mosiah chapter 9 and chapter 10 is the same chapter in the printer's manuscript. It's only that we designate it in the new context. But this one's only one chapter, chapter 22 in Mosiah, and here he's using the same story arc in the first bit, and he's repeating it again in the second bit, and so they kind of line up as well. So we know that this is Joseph. This is his mode of operandi. So he, this is just part of the code, and you can take parts of the Book of Mormon, line them up next to other parts of the Book of Mormon, and find them, just match up.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Okay, bondage to the money diggers. So Alma is a priest of Noah, and he escapes, but he doesn't quite escape, right? He gets we find out in Mosiah chapter 23 and 24 that he is put under bondage to one of the priests of Noah, who's Amulon, and he has to keep, keep doing bad stuff. So this is what happens to Joseph. Joseph makes a change, that secret conversion, and he wants to make a change in his life, but his father and the money diggers in his community won't let him change. And this is absolutely what happens to him. So, Rebecca, can you take care of these?
Let's do it. This is Bondage to Money Digging, 1827. In Mosiah 23:33, Amulon did plead with the Lamanites, and he also sent forth their wives, who were the daughters of the Lamanites, to plead with their brethren that they should not destroy their husbands. This is from Hyle Lewis. The Hale family was greatly exasperated by Joseph and Emma's elopement, and perhaps it would not have been safe for Smith to have shown himself at his father-in-law's house. I bet not. Emma was or had been the idol or favorite of the family, and they all still felt a strong attachment for her, and the permission to return and reconciliation was effected and accomplished by her and perhaps her sister. Interesting. That's a parallel right there. And then in Mosiah 24:9, for Amulon knew Alma that he had been one of the king's priests. He exercised authority over them and put tasks upon them and put taskmasters over them. And from Peter Ingersoll's statement of 1833, Joseph told me on his return that he intended to keep the promise which he had made to his father-in-law, but said he, it will be hard for me, for they will all oppose, and they want me to look in the stone for them to dig money. And in fact, it was as he predicted. They urged him day after day to resume his old practice of looking in the stone. He seemed much perplexed as to the course he should pursue. In this dilemma, he made me his confidant. Interesting.
So just these events in Joseph's life that are just so beautifully mirrored in what he's writing in Mosiah chapter 23 and 24 are just gorgeous. I love it.
This almost sounds like, okay, he's made a promise to his father-in-law that he won't look in the stone. He gets home, everybody's, trying to get him to look in the stone and do the work that do the family business. And it's almost like he has to take the two and combine them. His father-in-law wants him to be a religious man, an honest man, a God-fearing man. His own father wants him to be a treasure digger, a counterfeiter, whatever. And so he kind of puts the two together, and he starts looking in a hat to make scripture so that he can satisfy his own father while still satisfying his father-in-law. It's almost like he put the two together to try to make both happy.
Mic drop. That's exactly.
Yeah. It is a mic drop. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
I couldn't have said it better.
You floored us, Landon. You stunned us with that commentary. But that's human nature, isn't it? He's got the two conflicting expectations, and I think you do that when you're in the middle. You try to somehow
satisfy both sides.
Both people are happy. Yeah, but then again, that's difficult to pull off because you're really not true to either side, but you're trying to meet the expectations, which are polar opposites almost. So brilliant.
The other thing about the first quote particularly that interests me, when I read the Book of Mormon, the whole idea of the Lamanite daughters being stolen really kind of it was so bizarre to me. Why wasn't there so much more anger? Why didn't when they found Amulon did they just not kill him? And that whole idea of sending forth your wives to kind of temper the situation and that makes a lot more sense when you realize that it's an elopement and that they haven't been kind of kidnapped. This is an elopement, and now the daughters are, in this case Emma, is pleading for her husband with her family, and they are having kind of compassion on him, just like the Lamanites had compassion on Amulon and the priests of Noah.
Yeah, because I kind of
when
feel
I
like in a warrior culture, you wouldn't send your women out. I mean, you just wouldn't. You know what I mean? That's not the code. You wouldn't do that in a warrior culture like they were portrayed in the Book of Mormon. You would not send the girls out to say, "Oh, please don't." I just don't think they would.
yeah, but it makes a lot more sense when you realize it is Emma
Yeah,
and she's a
yeah,
willing participant, and now she's trying to reconcile the family.
Yeah,
Um,
plead for him. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
so yeah, it just lines up so beautifully with Joseph's life, that you could almost do the other, the reverse engineering, right? You can understand what's happening to him by what he's writing. I mean, it's an adventure story. He's put his his life into an adventure context. But when you look at the words and the ways that he's relating these experiences, you get, it's an autobiography, and you can kind of get the idea of how he's feeling about these particular situations and who's involved.
Well,
I think it's curious that he.
whatever
Sorry.
happened to Isaac Hill? I've heard all these stories and all these quotes, but then he just seems to disappear.
Oh, he dies. Um, he dies in sometime in the middle of 1830s. In fact, Emma, when they start doing baptisms for the dead in 1840, Emma gets baptized on behalf of her father, Isaac Hale.
Mm.
Well, that's interesting. A woman being baptized for a man.
They don't tell you that in the history books either.
No, they don't. There's a lot of wonky stuff going on in the early church as far as sealings and how those happened and baptisms. And yeah, a lot of crazy stuff they'll have to sort out in the next slide.
Great, great. Okay, next one. Escaping Manchester and the money diggers, right? So Joseph is surrounded by this. How's he gonna get out? And of course, this is documented in Mosiah chapter 24, and it's miraculous how he gets to how Amulin's persecuting him, but God tells him he's going to be delivered, and it causes a deep sleep to come upon the Lamanites, and then he's able to kind of just escape. But what actually happens to Joseph Smith in Manchester when he's trying to leave because of the persecution? And there was plenty of it, right? The money diggers, once they believed that he had the Golden Bible, they were trying to get it off him. And there's a lovely little story that Lucy relates about this, and because these are his treasure digging gang, right? And they are trying to get the plates from him. So this is from the history. They made every possible move towards preventing the work. Mr. Smith was soon informed that 10 or 12 men were clubbed together with one Willard Chase. What was most ridiculous is they'd sent for a conjurer to come 60 miles to divine the place where the record was deposited in magic art. We were apprehensive that the plates were taken out and secreted somewhere, and we're somewhere and somewhat uneasy, lest they might, like Moses, who was hidden in the bush bulrushes, be discovered by our enemies. So, the money diggers in Manchester were so convinced that Joseph had plates that they were willing to get a conjurer from a long distance away to try and extract the plates from, and find them, use their own seer stone and mechanisms to find the plates, right? So Joseph had to get out of town. He had to get out of Manchester, just like Alma needs to escape Amulon and the money diggers, the priest of Noah.
It's interesting that she says that's ridiculous that they sent for a conjurer to determine by the magic art when that's exactly what her husband and sons are doing.
It's like a scene out of Harry Potter, everybody with their wand, fighting it out, trying to the money diggers against money digger. Who's got the most powerful stone?
What's the spell for where are the plates, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what that would be. Play to find us or something like that.
Play to find us.
Play to find us.
Is that Latin of some sort?
No, I totally just made it up.
No, it's
that's just Reformed Latin.
That's Reformed Latin. That's right. Reformed spell Latin. That's it.
Gosh, it's getting rough in Manchester. They conjurers upon conjurer, magic art is upon magic art. see a stone as upon magic rod. Oh gosh, yeah. I want to see this movie. This sounds amazing. So Peter Ingersoll also says, um, in the fall of 1827, Joseph wanted to go to Pennsylvania. His brother-in-law, Alva Hale, had come to assist him in moving, but he himself was out of money. Joseph went to Palmyra and said I there met that damn fool Martin Harris and told him that I had a command to ask the first honest man I met with for $50 of money, and he would let me have it. I saw at once, said Joe, that it took his notion, for he promptly gave me the 50. Joseph thought the sum was sufficient to bear his expenses to Pennsylvania, so he immediately started off.
So
it was a miracle.
Yeah.
This is Joseph calling Martin Harris the damn fool?
Yep. That's what Peter Ingersoll said, yes.
Wow.
A term of endearment. Endearment.
Yes.
You damn fool.
The guy gave him the money and he calls him the damn fool. Yeah, because he knows that you're never seeing that money again. Right. Yeah. He doesn't say a kind and compassionate Martin Harris. No. It's the damn fool, which tells you he's actually taking advantage of him.
And he takes a lot more advantage of him in the next months. Okay, so let's have a look at the characters here. Here are all the autobiographical characters. So here's the code. Here's the code behind the text that will help you to be able to decipher what is going on and be able to see it through Joseph's eyes as his own history. So Joseph Smith is the seer and translator, just like King Mosiah is the seer and translator. Joseph Smith Sr. is the wicked father, King Noah. Lucy Mack Smith, his mother, is Gideon. Alvin Smith, his leader, fantastic older brother, Zenith. Hiram Smith, his benign older brother, is King Limhi. Isaac Hale, his father-in-law, is Abinadi, and also one of the Lamanite fathers. The creditors, the land agents that are around the house and they owe money to other Lamanites, the evil others. Joseph Smith Jr. Giving up his money digging is Alma, as he's this converted priest. And potentially, there's a faithful friend called Helam. That's probably Oliver Cowdery. Could be Samuel. And of course, Emma Hale is the Lamanite daughters. And the priests of Noah are the money diggers. And that's how you can decode Mosiah. I think one of the oddest things, though, is that Emma never gets a name in this. She's the wife of Nephi, and she's the Lamanite daughters, but she doesn't even get a name. At least Lucy, his mother, gets Sariah and Nephi, and then she also gets Gideon, even though that's a male character in Mosiah. So it's just really interesting the ways that you can kind of dissect Joseph based on these characters. His brother, his brothers are kings. He's a king. His wife is nameless. His mother is named, but kind of she's obscured. Women in this story are very few and far between. So, yeah, just so fascinating. Okay, and so in conclusion, Mosiah is a detailed history of the Smith family from 1820 to 1829. And so hopefully I've given a lot of good evidence and a lot of great comparison that suggests that if you read Lucy Mack Smith's history and Dan Vogel's early Mormon documents, that you'll be able to see from the testimonies of his neighbors and from Lucy Smith's recounting of the Smith family history. And you can also go look at Joseph Smith's own histories that he dictated throughout his life, that all of these things just beautifully marry up and show that the Book of Mosiah is his autobiography.
Yes, very
Maybe a plot.
interesting. And I realize, this is a theory, and obviously there's got to be more academic investigation into this, and people can point and say, no, 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 Gideon is not Lucy. Gideon would be, and you could change names out. But the premise is very interesting, and there are there are a lot of parallels there to consider. So yeah, you really got me thinking on this. So appreciate it, Ganesh.
Yeah, and especially since it's the first thing written after the missing pages, right? Yeah. And so I would say scrambling, right? Scrambling for content. Like if you've ever like been in high school, written a paper and your dog ate it or you lost it and you're like, crap, it's the night before. And I know I wrote it. I spent all this time. Now I got to come up with something else. What are you going to do? Something that's familiar, right? That's what's going to happen. So that makes total sense to me that he would then just kind of reach into his own memory, his own experience. And it's very easy to recreate something like that if you're scrambling because you've got those dang missing pages. You've got to recreate it.
And it seems very sophisticated when you're looking at it as a piece of text. But when you realize that he's just recounting his history, of course he's going to do it. Like he's going, okay, look, my family are in trouble. Oh, I remember a time when my oldest brother, was in charge and things were great. And then things got really bad after he died. And then, we lost the family farm. And, Brother Hiram has to take over. And I scarpered because, things were getting terrible there, and I wanted to get married, and so he's telling all these pieces of the puzzle, all these events of his own life and the lives of his family, and weaving it into this adventure story, because that nobody's going to listen to this poverty-stricken nobody, but they're going to listen if it's kings and fighting and intrigue, and and he felt like he had all of that in his life. He felt like his life was really intriguing. It was really adventurous. This mirrored lots of things, and of course, there's a number of parts of that where he's drawing in biblical stories as well. The idea of this martyr prophet, of the idea of being connected to the Lord. He's got the idea of the commandments and people following the commandments. And so there's this almost like this pride cycle going on. So he's weaving in there the narratives and the morals that he wants to have as part of this kind of understanding. He wants people to understand his life through this gospel, Christ-centered viewpoint, while seeing him as these heroes in the story.
Yeah, leaving Manchester kind of reminded me of the Exodus story. They're taking their animals and going out into the wilderness and departing from their home. So I think he tries again. It seems that he's taking that family that he belongs to and trying to make it seem more up here on the hell level, that he's playing to his father-in-law. That's really an interesting concept.
Yeah.
No, it is. And in fact, when we were reading that, the flocks and the animals, I was actually picturing that from the movie. Do you remember the big movie in the 70s, Exodus? Bum, 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 right? It's so dramatic, right? Come on, it's a great movie. Everyone should watch it if you haven't seen it. It's very dramatic. Yes. But yeah, he's definitely the main character in his own life and in, everything around him. Who else would wear a general's costume? Like, who would wake up in the morning and put that on, right? You're the main character.
Well, it makes me wonder what would have happened if Isaac Hell hadn't have died. Would there been more of a steadying influence in his life? Because once he dies, he's taken on this persona, but then he seems to become this power-hungry egomaniac that just, takes whatever women he wants. He takes whatever land he wants. He doesn't care who he upsets. It seemed that it bothered him that Isaac Hell was upset that he'd taken his daughter. It's like the first time in his life someone actually called him on being himself. But once Isaac Hell's out of the way, he's unleashed to become his real self. And that's when he moves into Kirtland, starts a bank and fails and is run off, and you just see all of this future things that start happening that is almost like he's unleashed because Isaac Hill maybe has passed away. Just a thought. I don't know.
Mm. It's a very good one. And there's so many little lovely intricacies in the text that are so fascinating. You know, what you were saying before about Rebecca, about the Exodus, you know, Abinadi comes across very much as a Moses kind of a character, you know, challenging the Pharaoh, let my people go,
Yeah.
stop holding them under bondage, you know, the Ten Commandments that Abinadi puts forward, you know, there are lots of Moses's motifs in the text, particularly around Abinadi and then of course into Limhi's, you know, Exodus and also Alma's Exodus. So yeah, very similar weave of autobiography with biblical parallels. You know, just it's really quite clever in a sense, and I think that um, yeah, as a piece of writing, actually, it's fabulous.
Yeah, of course, it shows that the author is influenced by the Bible,
Yes.
which could not have possibly happened if it were a real, you know, a real book. Obviously, Mosiah could not have been impacted by biblical teachings or biblical stories.
Yeah. And there's so much more to do on this, of course. I mean, I've only just broached the surface. I think there's a huge amount of research to be done in lining up. There are many other little quirks about the stories that I thought were fascinating, but just couldn't include in this presentation. So there's a lot in there, and I feel like it's a real big shift. If we're looking at the Book of Mormon as autobiography, then we can actually understand Joseph. We can repurpose Joseph because we know what his thoughts are because he's writing them down in the moment about his own experience. I mean, he's using the narrative of this adventure story to do so. But you know, when he's using words like privately and he's using words like ashamed, these tell us things that he's feeling, ways in which he's interacting. You know, the fact that he spends a lot of time talking about Abinadi and not much time talking about the daughters of the Lamanites suggests that, you know, his real respect is for other men, not necessarily for women, which I think Landon, you adequately describe later on in his life. We see that, you know, he uses women. He seems to be quite charismatic. He manages to attract them, but he's not very good at treating them well. So, and that just shows through in the Book of Mormon. The only real woman with any reverence is his mother, and that's in First Nephi with Sariah and then Gideon and Mosiah. So, just these fascinating insights into him personally that then play out various ways throughout his life.
I guess the key is read between the lines, honestly. That's it. He's telling you everything you need to know. And I have to say, I've never been more interested in the Book of Mormon than I am on the other side of Mormonism. Don't you guys feel that way?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like a giant puzzle, right? You want to figure out how did he do it? You know, and I think this is an important key, like I said, with the Matrix background, you know, the idea that once you understand what the code is, then you can decode it. You can see it for what it is. You can see all of the characters and how they play out, and suddenly it just fits into place just so beautifully and so magically. It's like a puzzle solved. And there are many more parts of this puzzle to be solved. So hopefully anybody who's listening or watching particularly, you go ahead and go and do these things for yourself. Don't take my word for it, right? Go read Lucy Maximus' history. Go read those early documents that Dan Vogel made available with regard to his neighbors. Compare them to the text. Take Alma chapter 9, Mosiah chapter 9, chapter 10, and do your own comparison. Compare it to Alma chapter 2. Take, you know, Mosiah chapter 22 and cut it in half and put it next to each other and do all those comparisons. You know, you should be able to check my working pretty easily, and you may well be able to find many more things that I have missed because, you know, if you're a literary student, and I definitely am not, you'll be able to find greater, more reliable patterns than even the ones that we've talked about today.
I know, I feel like AI could help with this too. Like you could literally put in the 2 chapters and say, find the comparisons here. I think there's a lot to explore.
Thank you, Ganesh.
Yeah, no, this was absolutely amazing. And my favorite part of all this discussion that we've had lately with Ganesh is just the idea of it being an adventure story. Like once I kind of wrap my brain around that, then everything I see and read in terms of the Book of Mormon, I kind of filter it through that. This is an adventure story. It's exactly what it is. And you could make money off adventure stories at that time period. There's precedence for it. We've seen them before. And this is exactly what I think he was trying to do. A Christian adventure story. An adventure story mingled with scripture. An adventure story mingled with scripture. That's it. That's the new thing. Interesting. So, well, it's been another amazing episode, and it's raised more questions that I really want to think about. And so please, everybody, comment. What did you think about this idea? And have you ever kind of come across anything like this, or are you now really excited to go and delve into it? I couldn't believe it when we were seeing those 2 passages side to side. I mean, I was kind of being quiet because I was like reading back and forth and going, oh my God, he's right. It was crazy to see when you put it aside. And for those of you that are listening, I hope maybe you'll just jump over to YouTube and look at the scriptural comparisons, because that was extremely telling. And we didn't read every single thing. Out loud, we were kind of looking back and forth, and there was a lot there. So please comment. Let us know what you thought. Please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you'd like to be made aware when new episodes come out, you can hit that notification bell and it will let you know when there's a new one. If you'd like to help financially support Mormonish Podcast, you can find our link to Donor Box. We're now a 501(c) in the show notes, and it's really easy to set up either a monthly payment or just support. And we sure appreciate all of you that do. We couldn't have fabulous guests like Ganesh on without your support and your help. So we really appreciate all of you. We also have links to our merch store in the show notes. So if you'd like to grab yourself a Mormonish mug or anything else fun, you can do that too. And again, thank you, Ganesh. You are just one of our absolute favorite returning guests, isn't he, Landon? He's great. We love Ganesh. He's great. Yeah, we love it. And also I have to say he matches our podcasting style as far as time zones. That's right. Right now it's like midnight for us, and it's like the afternoon for you. So it's perfect when you're burning the midnight oil.
Famous. It's been a real pleasure, and very excited to see what the reception's like on this, because I think this is cutting edge of what the Book of Mormon has to offer for us, and I think that there's so much more here, and I'd love to see what other people come up with. And you're coming to Sunstone, right, Ganesh? Correct. I'm presenting at Sunstone, and my presentation is on finding Joseph in the Book of Mormon. Oh. So this is my real passion is identifying Joseph, and hopefully I've identified quite a bit of him today. And there's so much more to find. Oh, that's great. Everybody come to Sunstone. It's the first week in August. It's at the University of Utah. You can look it up online, get tickets. There's going to be a lot of guests that you've seen here on Mormonish that are presenting at Sunstone. We are really excited. So make an effort to come, especially if you're local. It's a really great opportunity to meet Ganesh and see him in person. It'll be great. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Once again, we'll see you next time on Mormonish. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.